Welcome back to the Fail channel, where we fail a lot. Our first attempt showed promise, got it to bronze, but there's some massive holes and a bunch of smaller holes because I had it too thin. So we're back with attempt number 2. I found a different STL file and I thought I could try to print the whole thing all at once, and after 38 hours of printing, it stopped. I don't know why, it just did. So I went back to the old method. Whoa boy. So I went back to the old method and I printed all the pieces, and we're going to rebuild the whole thing.
Now, since the first time, I've got a temperature-controlled soldering iron, and that works a lot better for cutting and removing the PLA. I still had to print the base with infill, and that's a pain to remove, but when I didn't use the infill, it looked like this, so I really didn't have a choice. But eventually I got it cleared away because, as I'm sure you remember, I need this to be a hollow shell for casting. For the other pieces, I only had to remove the bottoms and some stringing. Then I made sure they were sanded flat so they'd fit together nice and smooth. I found that a little bit of sticky wax helps the pieces stick together so I can get them aligned perfectly, and then I add the super glue to make sure they're stuck and won't come apart. Once the pieces are all together, I try to sand down any seams or fill in any gaps.
So we got the body back in one piece. I still have the wings from the last one. I'll have to do those separate. But for now, I'm going to thicken this up a little bit and pour some wax in there. I'm going to have the wax as cool as possible because I don't want the heat to distort this. If we keep the wax temperature really low, pour it in and out quick, I think we'll be okay.
This is where I went wrong last time. It was too thin, but I still don't want it to be too thick, so there's a balance. I suppose I could just print it with thicker walls, but that makes a print take a lot more time, and Splinter's been having enough trouble getting these prints to work out. The first attempt just stopped, and the next one had this big bird nest after a layer shift, and I tried one more time and the same thing happened, so I'm not sure what the deal is. Regardless, it's time to do the sprueing, and in this time I took some bigger pieces of sprue wax and put those on the base. That'll act as a channel to let any air escape, so I won't get those bubbles and those holes in the base this time. A few holes will act as vents so the investment can flow inside. I'll cover these up with the wings anyway. Because my flask is so short, all my gating and venting has a super low profile. This kind of looks like a mess, but I'm hoping that it works. Then it's time for the investment. This is the biggest investment piece that I've done, and it takes 15 pounds of powder. I mix it up, pour it in slowly because it's too tall to fit in my vacuum chamber, and then put it in the kiln for the burnout.
It just dawned on me that I may have made a tremendous blunder. I forgot to put in the chaplets. What the chaplets are little metal pins that go inside and hold the core in place. Without those pins, the only thing that's holding the core in place is this small section at the bottom. Now if that breaks, the core tips, the statue's screwed. It's not going to work. So I need to be extremely careful that the core doesn't break when I move that flask around.
The PLA doesn't burn as cleanly as wax, and it leaves behind a little bit of ash. So I use an air compressor to blow air through the mold, and that'll clear out any ash left behind. All the while being very careful not to dislodge that core.
Just got some new bronze in the mail, and these are too big for me, so I gotta cut them in half. I always hate doing that.
This part I don't usually show, but every bronze bar I buy is too big to fit in my crucible, so I have to take a saw and cut them in half. It's a pain. But the fun part is when I get to play with fire and melt some metal. I'll try vacuum casting this, even though this piece might be a little bit too big for my setup. At least I got a good vacuum pull. Hopefully that means it's working. Oh, hopefully this one doesn't explode like Teddy Roosevelt. This one's a lot bigger. It holds a lot more heat. It's just like Yellowstone National Park in my garage. Once that settles down, we'll pull it out and see how it did. Hard to believe this was once plastic.
It's looking good so far.
A quick sandblast and then we'll really see what we're dealing with.
So that turned out much better. There's no holes in the body. I actually think I had the wax slightly too thick, because I can see some crystal patterns on the back, and that's a sign of metal shrinkage. There's a fine line between too thin and too thick, but still it turned out really well. Let's get the wings cast now.
I'm gonna just sprue this up the way I would anything else. You know the routine. With these, I'll get away with a little bit smaller flask, so instead of 15 pounds of investment, I'll only use 7.
We have the wings of victory. There's one section here that has metal shrinkage. Always fighting metal shrinkage, but I'm pretty sure I can fix it. Overall, it looks good, and our little friend even looks pretty good.
I snuck a miniature one in there while you weren't looking. I'll get them cut off, cleaned up, and then I have to weld them to the main piece. I buy a silicone bronze welding rod that matches the color perfectly. I'm not the best welder, but once all the metal chasing's done, you can't tell a difference at all.
So the wings are on. There's some flashing to remove. Need to clean up the weld beads and do a little bit of metal chasing.
The flashing is from a small crack that formed in the investment, but they're usually pretty easy to remove. The weld beads are ground away with my Dremel, and for the finer stuff, I'll use a file. I alternate between the file and the Dremel. The Dremel is faster, but honestly, the file gives a cleaner finish. The part of the wing that had metal shrinkage, I'm going to try to just blend in. I won't be able to get it 100% perfect, but if you didn't know it was there, you probably wouldn't notice. Another quick sandblasting lets me see even more detail. And I can see there's a lot of imperfections. Crystal patterns that I think are caused by impurities. It could be metal shrinkage, I'm not really sure. So I'm going to use what are called matting tools to burnish them out. In this case, I took a burned up drill bit, rounded the edge, and I used that to smooth out those imperfections, combined with some carbide burrs on my Dremel. In places that would allow it, I took a ball peen hammer to burnish out some of those imperfections. However, I got a little bit too aggressive with the hammering. I ended up cracking the welds for the wings and had to redo them. Still, for other imperfections, I clipped small pieces of bronze and placed them in the holes, then hammered them in place and smoothed them off. Still, in other places where files wouldn't reach, I smoothed it off with a little bit of hand sanding. Then I'll quickly flatten the bottom, and then it's time for the finishing. I buff it with a wire wheel to give it a little bit of a shine. For the smaller crevices, I have to use smaller wire wheels on my Dremel. Once that's done, I'll add the patina. I use a flame and liver of sulfur to get an oxidizing layer over the bronze. It transforms it into that rich bronze color that we all associate with bronze sculptures. I'll buff it one more time with some wire brushes to bring out a few highlights, and then seal it with a metal protectant. I use Protect-A-Clear. I'll add some felt to the bottom so this 10-pound sculpture doesn't scratch anything it's placed on. And then it's done.
It's not 100% perfect. You can still see some flaws. But overall, I'm really happy with how this turned out. Thanks to my friend Daniel for suggesting this piece. If there's something that you guys want me to try, let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching.